why did God create death? Well, in fact, the question is inadequately put at the Catholic level, because I would say that God did not create death. And this is something that faith tells us, namely that the plan of God at the beginning is not at all that we die physically. On the other hand, His project is that we reach in our heart a state of death, interior death to ourselves, because it is the absolute condition to perceive God. When He creates Adam and Eve, He just puts them through the same obligatory test. Otherwise, you cannot stand the sight of God. No one can perceive God without this inner death, the same condition that He put upon the angels. He asks Adam and Eve have total freedom. They obey one point, not to choose for their reasons good and evil, but accept what God has placed as good, namely love of God, love of neighbor, and obedience. This ordeal seems light. However, in fact, it is quite terrible, because the characteristic of a spiritual being is obviously to be able to become like a God, to choose oneself what is good and what is bad, and that's where Adam and Eve fell. God, far from being discouraged, simply accepted their choice. They no longer desired His presence while filled their hearts, which harmonized totally their being, their mind, their psyche, their body, to the point that they could not get sick. He withdrew. He was still there, but hidden. He left them to fend for themselves like disobedient children in a world He was protecting. They shouldn't have been devoured by animals which now were afraid of them, and when their body, which was the biological body the same as ours, now has followed its natural path, it is made of a material that is corruptible by nature, and in addition it is genetically programmed to last for a certain time. When their body arrives at its end, God did not come to seek them. Normally all should have gone up to heaven and ought not stay in this earth, which is a fleeting mantle. Ascending to heaven by assumption, as in the case of the Blessed Virgin Mary, she went through this assumption, but God left them to their own devices, to themselves, and so their body naturally wore out, and death eventually occurred by this physical death, therefore not created by God, but in fact produced by the absence of action by God, who desired to save them. In this way, Adam and Eve touched their own miseries, their own poverty. Oddly enough, they were saved by this, which means that they realized that without God they were like wandering beings, unable to do anything, and in addition, by this terrible suffering, without counting the silence of God, the famous humility which it was so necessary to acquire through obedience, and indeed they acquired it through the experience of suffering. And this goes much further. He who suffered, and Adam and Eve suffered moments of despair, became more aware of his misery, much humbled compared to his own pride than he who simply obeyed. Admittedly, obedience will have been sufficient for eternal life, but there what immense progress, what ultimately blissful fault that Adam and Eve committed to obtain such a salvation, such a level of desire, because of the absence of God, humility. And that's how they entered the beatific vision on Good Friday, because they were ready.